got, you rascal, you. I wonder what you got, you rascal, you. They wonder what you got, makes my wife think you so hot. And I wonder what you got, you rascal, you.
Hello, my name is Nick Thomas, and I'm a juggler. Now, I learned to juggle when I was just 9 years old, but I had an interest in juggling even before then. Here's me at just age 6, throwing a juggling club up to a guy on a unicycle at SeaWorld. Even at age 6, I had perfect form. Now, when I was 12, that's when I really started to love juggling. I'd come home from school every day, and I'd practice for hours, and I did this for years. Now, in my thousands of hours of practice, I learned a lot. Most importantly, I learned that a lot of the limits that we face are often not physical, but mental. Sometimes the belief that something is impossible is the only thing making it so. In 1954, the world record for the mile run was 4 minutes and 1 second. And then Roger Bannister came along, breaking the record, the 4-minute mile barrier, at a time of 3:59.4. And that record stood for about a month. The previous record for 11 years, and 1 month after Bannister broke the record, someone else broke it. Within a few years, there were dozens of runners breaking the 4-minute mile barrier, something that had never been done before Roger. Now, the idea of a record being broken and quickly replicated was named the Bannister effect, named after Roger. Looking back, Roger may not have actually been the best example of the Bannister effect. It might have actually just really been a coincidence that the record had stood at 4:01 for so long, but the effect itself is still real and can be seen today. For example, in skateboarding, we have Tony Hawk, who landed the first ever 900, and now we can see 7-year-olds doing the trick today. We also have video game speedrunning, where a record can stay for years, but once it's broken, it's quickly duplicated. And even in more mainstream sports like the NFL, where kickers are now routinely making kicks that would have been record-breaking just a few decades ago. Now, in my life, I've experienced the Bannister effect. Growing up, I loved juggling, but I also loved solving Rubik's Cubes. I thought it'd be really cool if I could juggle in one hand and solve a Rubik's Cube in the other hand. Turns out, as someone who could already solve a Rubik's Cube and already juggle pretty well, this wasn't too hard. So I was able to just kind of do it. So I wanted to take it to the next level. What if, instead of just holding the cube, I was juggling the cube and solving it at the same time? What I would do is I would make a turn with one of the hands, the other hand would set it up for the other hand to make the turn. This proved to be a lot more difficult. I worked on this on and off for a few months, and eventually was starting to make some progress. But I found it was very difficult to keep track of the later algorithms as I was working on them, trying to figure out the rotation of the cube, and I eventually just sort of gave up. I had worked on it for a while, but got pretty far, and unfortunately, I gave up. Coincidentally, about a month later, a student at Stanford, Ravi Fernando, posted a video of himself doing exactly that, solving a Rubik's Cube and juggling it at the same time. And that video went viral. It got featured on ESPN, The Today Show, Good Morning America, many other publications. I had tons of friends sending me this video. And I was disappointed. I was also a little jealous, but I was mostly disappointed because I had gotten so close to it, and I gave up. So I went back to it with a brand new approach. I didn't change anything about what I was doing, but I now knew that it was possible. So within about 2 weeks, I did my first successful Rubik's Cube solve while juggling. Just 2 weeks. Thank you. And in doing so, I became the second person to solve a Rubik's Cube while juggling. Now, it didn't have the same viral impact, but I was still proud of myself. But what if we took the bannister effect and we went one step further? I want to propose something called the Danzig effect, named after George Danzig. Now, in 1939, George was a student at UC Berkeley, and he walked into class late one day. He saw a couple homework problems written on the board. He went home, worked on them. Took a little bit longer than usual, but he was able to complete them. He then brought those back to his professor, and his professor got around to him eventually. But once the professor got around to it, he came banging on George's door at 8 in the morning. George answered the door a little confused, but then he found out that those were not actually homework problems. They were unsolved problems in statistics. And George unknowingly proved them because he thought he was supposed to. Now, this was the inspiration for the movie Good Will Hunting, and the story itself has kind of been exaggerated over the years, but the basis for the story is still true. Now, going back to my juggling, when I first started, I didn't have any mental barriers on what was possible. I didn't really have hundreds of 4K videos to watch of other jugglers, so after my uncle taught me how to juggle 3 balls like this, I was kind of on my own. So I invented tricks. I invented juggling 2 balls in one hand. I invented having a ball go back and forth between the hands. I invented throwing 2 up at the same time like this, passing it between the hands or back and forth like this. In my mind, I invented all of these tricks. Now, of course, I actually didn't invent them. I was just a 9-year-old with a dream. But I did end up getting some really cool tricks that I eventually learned and collaborated with other jugglers. But at the time, it was pretty exciting to be inventing all of these tricks. But at the same time as George Danzig, around that time, there was a juggler by the name of Alexander Kiss. Now, he's one of the greatest jugglers. And what he was doing was working on a very difficult trick that involved 4 sticks, very similar to the juggling clubs, and he was juggling them something like this, where they were sync at the same time. But while he was doing that, juggling the 4 juggling clubs, he also had a ball, and what he was doing with the ball was he took the ball, and while juggling the 4 clubs, he was actually bouncing it on his head, just like that, at the same time as juggling the 4 clubs. Now, this is a very difficult trick. There are some jugglers who can do that today. However, one of his friends saw him working on the trick. He told him about another juggler, an Italian juggler named Enrico Rastelli, as you can see here. Enrico Rastelli was one of the greatest jugglers of all time. And his friend told him about how he had done a similar trick, but instead of bouncing 1 ball on his head, he was bouncing 2 balls on his head at the same time, going back and forth. Now, most of you guys are probably not jugglers out there, so you don't really have a context of how hard that trick is. So for context, I really only know of a few jugglers in the world today who have any level of consistency of bouncing 2 balls on their head, and really only one juggler in the last maybe 50 so years has been able to do it for long periods of time. And that was Anthony Gatto, who is generally considered to be the greatest technical juggler. And only he could do it while bouncing 2 balls, but he didn't even work on juggling at the same time. So Alexander Kiss got to work. He practiced countless hours, mastering not just bouncing 2 balls on his head, but also juggling 4 at the same time. That is something I would have considered to be almost impossible, maybe even impossible. But after tons of hours, he got it to a point where he's able to show his friend the trick. And his friend was very surprised, but probably not as surprised as Alexander Kiss when he found out that his friend was lying to him. Enrico Rastelli had never done that trick. But just like George Danzig, he thought someone else had done it and didn't have the mental barrier and was able to do something that I would have considered to be impossible. Now, going back to my juggling, when I first started, of course, I didn't know what was or wasn't possible. There's one trick that I was really proud of, this one. It's actually called the box, where the ball goes back and forth, just like this. You can see a ball in the bottom going between the 2 hands, and the other ball's going straight up and down. Now, for a while, that's all there was to it. This trick is probably hundreds of years old. But eventually some variations came out, like the double box, where you do 2 at the same time. There's also some shuffle variations, where one of the balls goes over top of the other, like that. But what if we took that trick and literally flipped it upside down? Now, we can't exactly turn gravity upside down, but what if we took it upside down? How would that work? Well, about 25 years ago, someone did just that, taking the bottom ball and moving it up to the top. Now, knowing that it's possible, it's maybe a little easier to envision, but it's still probably pretty hard to think about. So I want you to think about something in your life. Maybe it's a short-term goal, a long-term goal. Maybe it's something you've given up on. And I want you to think about it in a brand new perspective. Literally flip it upside down. I want you to ask yourself, is my goal really impossible? Or have I just not seen someone do it yet? Thank you.